Yo. Oh, oh dear. What's just happened? Okay, no, it's all good. Okay.
It's all good.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Do you want me to full screen?
Yeah, we can back slideshow.
Okay.
Oh, okay. So, like I said, we're gonna look at some pretty pictures and just kind of analyze them to get some creative juices flowing. Um, Great. Okay. So, this is kind of like a section perspective, right? So you can see how they've got their thick section line, and then they probably uh, you've got their curb and the bike lanes in the right place, but then they've done a 1 point perspective to add that other visual, that perspective, right? Um, we've got some leaders that seem to be color coded, pointing out to various LID features. Very strong. There's entourage. There's a woman poised to be walking her dog across the street. Makes it a little bit more believable when they're like about to do something interacting with the scene. Um, I guess notice how they've really kind of used minimal color here. They're using a real kind of photographic images for vegetation only because they're highlighting these like LID features like we were just kind of talking about. Um, yeah, low impact development. So that's like going to be bioswales, um, like infiltration trenches, stuff like that. Uh, Green infrastructure. Sometimes this stuff gets used interchangeably. Um, yeah. So, and LID, low impact development, also often really just gets associated with stormwater management. But of course, when we talk about green infrastructure, it becomes a lot more broad. Urban forest comes into play, urban how it combats urban heat island habitat, all that kind of stuff. Um, so like some other things with this image is we can see that they're views like a realistic sky, but notice the level of detail that they're providing on the buildings. It's they've got some like line work there, but it's not they're not showing materiality, they're just showing form. Um, and then they're really highlighting that one aspect of the greenery, the stormwater management, all that kind of stuff. Um, so here's like one of the ISOs uh, that looks like it's kind of got a section cut going on as well. Again, this is highlighting LID by focusing on the green. Um, but a different way of showing entourage. I really like the trees there. They are kind of drawn in different styles, but they're similar enough that they work well together. Um, they've shown a little bit of patterning on the oh, we can. Can you see my mouse? Yeah, you can. So there's like a little bit of pattern in this space here. But like simple, effective, conveys a lot with a few leaders and a paragraph, you can say a lot, right? So again, like what I think what's interesting about this is like how they've done the building massing. So not a lot of detail in the buildings. Also good line weights. See how like the outside of the building is a little thicker than the details on the inside, and then they add like another level of detail in their study area that they're caring about. Um, and then they've got these kind of for circulation. They've got these elements that go into the context and show you how that project site relates to the larger area. Um, Labels like Centennial Bridge, boat ramp, all very effective at helping the viewer orient themselves and understand what it is that we're talking about. Um, Also a restrained palette, right? So they're using like 6 colors here, so maybe 7. Um, so plan renders, right? There's a series of these, and from those Photoshop techniques that we showed you, you can start developing these. I guess I wanted to point out, like, they've got the line weight of the buildings, they've got line work here, they've got shadows, they've got trees that also have shadows, they've got people in plan doing stuff that also have shadows, and cars and street furniture all have shadows. They've also used like texture of real water here to pump that up. Whereas when they go over to some of these other like hardscape areas, I think that's more of just like a color pattern. Okay. The trees are symbolic. They're not like a photographic image. But when you start layering all this stuff up, it starts to have like a photo-like quality to it, right? And then here's how they've put together some perspectives or some perspective drawings, 1 or 2 point, to then reinforce their design and plan. So pretty high caliber work. This is more of the same as it moves along, but something to notice is like the variation of texture in the lawn here. So like does it, I don't know, like that's not like a shadow or anything, but like just that variation helps it read as like more realistic. Seems to be just a fade. I guess I also like how they've the mouse is reversed, so when I go left it goes right. But they've what they've done is they've combined their tree symbols in these forested areas so that they don't read as individuals and it reads more of a block. Also, they've got multiple kind of tree symbols. There's these lighter green ones, these smaller, darker green ones, these kind of frondy ones, these other ones, these like purple ones that all help with like variation and it seeming like a real image. And like things like this, like see how this little truck is turning around this intersection rather than just being in a straight shot. Just these little elements make it more believable. They're part of the art of what we do, and you know, it's like the little joys that we got to take. But there's also, you know, a train here and stuff like that. So again, like really good use of shadows, different textures for hardscape, like something simple for asphalt, but at like the public space amenity nodes, there's either this serrated paving or wooden deck that's shown differently. It looks like the roof plazas are just like one block of color, but also like we'll notice how this shifts in scale, right? And that at like this larger scale, you can start to see more details of the trees. So going back one, you know, this is zoomed out and then when we move forward, this is zoomed in on this area. So kind of, you know, having that scalar approach to setting up what views you're showing and where you're zooming in on and what you're focusing on all relates back to developing that narrative and selling your design. Again, this one's really kind of effective. They've got this fun kind of public piece of art here that's also casting a shadow. This interesting paving pattern here. Lots of interesting things, but the foundation of it is the line work from CAD. They've then like built it all up in Photoshop and whatever. So I think that this was done in Photoshop. I don't think this was done in like any fancy rendering program. So this is nice. So we can see that what they've done is they've overlaid their design on like a Google image ortho photo that they've desaturated or added a black and white to, right? And then like good line weights, right? Variation of line weights that provide a hierarchy. We can see where the building is, we can see where the main circulation is, and then these like paving patterns are a little less. They've used like white for the trees instead of black. That is an interesting effect and keeps it nice and light. And a restrained color palette that's really just highlighting the it's not necessarily just a landscape. It's the whole urban public realm here with the pavements and this and that. Yeah, well, I mean, you could do this all in CAD. It's probably easier to do it in Illustrator. And so it looks like there's for sure some CAD stuff here to the left. Sorry, gotta go right to go left. There. So yeah, we can see that there's like and this is, yeah, so palimpsest we mentioned at the beginning, right? So this like layering of information and how when you're in control of it, you can really get things to pop. So it looks like there's a very technical line drawing with this fucking mouse. No, it's that the screen, like the screen to the left is actually to the right, and then I keep sliding over. But it's okay. I'll live. Um, and so, like, I think that there was probably this base CAD stuff that was exported. Then there was like the orthophoto. Maybe it was orthophoto first, then CAD lines, which are probably these gray bits here, and maybe the contours. And then it was probably refining that, taking out like less of that CAD, like your road line work, building footprint, and design, and then taking that into Illustrator, pumping it up with like the white and the line weight adjustments, and then like that sitting over top. Yeah, no shadows in this, but still an effective drawing. Um, yeah, there is some CAD because you can see here that there's like that stippling R sand hatch that's often used for grass. So does that answer your question? I think there are shadows and they're going the wrong way. So these guys here, they've got shadows down right. And the only reason I'm saying they're going the wrong way is based on these other elements in the orthophoto and the shadow that they're going with. So it's okay. I wouldn't mark this down. But even like here, they've got bike racks, right? So it's like this level of detail. It reads really well. For whatever reason, these are greener than this green, so those are like an enhanced landscape treatment. Okay. Oh, and I guess then they've got this like very high caliber render of their design to the right, right? But that speaks to like the what level of detail we're going to show at what scale and where, and making those decisions. So like I think in your first assignments, a lot of you spent so much time like drawing all the details of a building when maybe you didn't necessarily need to. Um, so some very photorealistic renders, sorry, by Adept Studio, Cologne, that's in Germany. But these were probably made with a mix of rendering software and then Photoshop. Um, so they've like, my guess is they've added their entourage in Photoshop because it's so specific. Could be wrong, but they've also then they played with the sky. They've added these birds. They've really played with the tones to make these very realistic, but they do have like a certain quality to them. Like this didn't just get pumped out of Lumen, I guess, right? Like they've spent some extra time crafting it. Um, something by PFS Studio in Vancouver. This is, I think, really interesting because we can see that there's this kind of Google Earth image in the background that they've photo matched or gotten the same viewpoint in whatever 3D modeling software that they did to then get their development in there. And I mean, when I look at this, it's like I wonder if something's like slightly wrong because you look at like how this edge of the building's kind of going that way, whereas this is going that way. But like the streets all line up, so it's like I don't think it's like perfectly lined up, but it's super effective, right? Like it doesn't always need to be perfect because you're conveying like important ideas, right? Um, yeah, I think that's where it goes wrong. I was looking at this last night and trying to, anyways. But even though this is like more photorealistic, we can still see like some of the line work that's going on. They've got the reflection in the water. Like I don't expect you. First of all, none of you, I don't think, have bodies of water this big to deal with. But all of these elements come through to make higher class work. But they've got all the trees again, variation of trees, variation of surfaces and textures. Like yeah, like I don't know, it's not totally photorealistic, it's artistic and very well done. um okay, so another PFS rendering that I don't think that this is hand drawn. I think this is done in the computer and then they've maybe used like a sketch filter. But, in these areas of buildings and landscape that they're showing, they're using like a stippling effect and just kind of color to get that, to get that kind of watercolory pixelated stuff. So you could do that just with like in Photoshop, just with a subset of brushes and colors. Like you don't need to get photorealistic textures. You can just kind of make your own if that's the style you're kind of going for. Whoa, what's going on there? Ah, okay. So, yeah, pretty simple, right? Like this is just line work and color. There's and there's not a huge, yeah, no, the line weight is there's good variation of as well. And they've got shadows and they've got shadows for the trees and shadows for the buildings. No entourage. Um, so some more like using those rendering softwares and bringing it into Google Earth. This is from like China. This is like I'm overwhelmed by the scale of this, especially like down to the bottom left. Like it's just like whoa, so massive, so urban. This was all greenfield before. And then some other kind of techniques, right, for your hand drawers in the crew, where we've got a photo image that has then been drawn over, and then there's been textures added in Photoshop and a little bit of color and a realistic sky. Um, and wow, how effective and what a great graphic that is. Corresponding section, right, where it's zoomed out quite a bit. They're not like going into the details of the. Oh, I guess there is like the curbs and the bioswales there. Um, got the buildings. We've got the space between the buildings. We've got like some added detail on things that they'd like to kind of highlight. And we see that this is this, right? So we can see this water tower here. They relate to one another. There's like, yeah, the depth of these ponding scenarios. Good stuff. So yeah, so I think the series, like, we just kind of wanted to highlight that you can use like Photoshop to amp up your sections and make them a bit more evocative. Um, in this upper image, we really kind of understand the topography of this public square, how it kind of drains to the center. There's some like looks like steps up here, more of a slope here. This like outlook, some sort of pool where you could go skating in the winter, and they've got this like background sky. They've been very delicate with the buildings. They're not too heavy. They've had them recede into the background, and then they've added this little snow effect that just makes it like a winter wonderland. Again, here in this bottom image, we've got that simple section line that's thicker, and then some of these other elements drawn in that highlight it. It's again a bit more of a adding that perspective drawing into the section to amp it up. Variation of tree symbols. They all are kind of at a similar I want to say tone. That's probably not the right word, but like they're all kind of faded to the same level. The colors relate together nicely. And look at how minimal the sky is. That like just adds. I think it adds a lot, but it's really like touched in a gentle way. Um, the entourage here: person walking, people doing chin ups, people on this lookout. Like you know that this is a lookout because that there's entourage there, and also they've taken care to make sure that like the people aren't showing behind the wall, right? Or they're not showing in front of the wall when they're behind the wall. So things like that, your drawing order, your laying order, using those layer masks to block out image aspects of your entourage when you need to. So um, again, like this kind of hybrid style that's super effective where they've drawn over photograph really quickly and simply and then used Photoshop to add in just gestural textures of what they're talking about, conveying their idea. I'd like hazard a guess that with inspiration, anybody in this room could pump this out in about an hour or two, right? No? How long? Tell me. 4 hours? 4 hours? 3 hours. You have 3 hours to do this starting now. This is the pop quiz. So this is all done in the computer land, but I think like that level of detail, right? So, you know, they're not showing a lot, but it's giving you a sense of this public space, and they've treated their entourage in the same way that helps it read as a picture. These trees all have the same like textural effect. There's shadows. They're showing the pavement. They're showing this great piece of public art here with the tentacles. Um, right? Just it seems like quite a happening public space market that they've got. It's public art that they're trying to highlight. Anywho, great little drawing here, right? Where I think what they've maybe done is they've modeled this seating area in something like SketchUp or Rhino, and they've applied like some textures, but then they've just added these trees and the vegetation in Photoshop. I don't know what they were doing with this blocky effect here, whether that's like some sort of stone uh, clone stamp uh, thing that's going on. I'm not crazy about the blockiness, but then look at how they've drawn in their entourage with just this like white gestural stuff. They've added the string lights. They've made it nighttime. Really evocative, really effective. Not super complex, right? This you could do in 2 hours. Come on. Um, so again, choosing what to highlight and where. I think that, yeah, I'm wondering if most of this is from a Google image or whether it is an actual like ortho photo, but then they've, just in Photoshop, they've got their trees in, but then they're reducing them as they go into the distance so that they're perspectively correct. Um, yeah, I think that this is a Google image because this looks to me like quite degenerated from Google. And then this building is a little, yeah, anyways. They've chosen to highlight the river in the background, the green streets, and the public spaces. And then they've really kind of faded out the edges and played with that like saturation contrast of their underlying Google image to have it like blow out towards the background and then blend in towards the foreground. Um, so these were interesting because this person actually built a model and then added like entourage in Photoshop. So for planners in the room, I'm afraid you guys don't get to do as many models as we do in grad school. And then we don't often get to make models outside of grad school, depending on which firms you work at. But this can be a really interesting technique of testing out ideas and then generating these presentation graphics easily with photos and simple Photoshop. So you're not spending hours in front of the computer. Well, probably you're spending a few hours in front of the computer rather than days. So again, this kind of hybrid drawing technique where they've combined like a photo from the site with some drawing techniques and then some textures. I think they could have maybe, like, I like how it's broken the canvas here, but this seems a little cheap to me. But anyways, it's great, great presentation graphics. I think this is effective on the left where they've shown this spirally staircase to heaven off. Yeah, anyways. Um, all right, so like different style of plan graphics. I wonder what this is doing. Context map indicates urban agricultural campus with living and recreational educational opportunities part of the design. Uh, Blue lines running through the map through the rivers of Guelph. So it's quite stylized, but again, quite effective. They've got the roads in white. So there's their building that they're interested in. They've just used these blotches of color that I find a little bit confusing, but if there was a legend, maybe it would help. So something that's a lot more illustrative, right? Just blocks of color, and we really see like some line work of the buildings, but not a whole lot of detail. It just kind of shows you how many stories they are. And then some sort of like land use, color coded stuff going on, some icons to represent key features, and these like various dash lines to highlight circulation. They've got the soccer field with like people playing soccer. They've got little bits of entourage, view lines highlighting like key views overlooking their development, things like that. So Another kind of similar version where they're zooming in scales. They're adding these kind of like diagrams here to show uh, these spaces at like a higher level of resolution, but still like this isn't detail, right? It's just kind of giving you a quick overview of the space. And look at how nice the line work is. So what they've done here is they've exported like their rendered version from Rhino. Then they've exported like a line work layer. Then they've like taken it into Illustrator, played with the blocks of color, added like their entourage, made it look really pro, added like another layer here that was probably their base layer that they've amped up like this more saturated color. They probably got another graphic where they're talking about these like other areas. So a section, right? Again, they've kind of used this section for the 2-point perspective, but we can see that the main part of the section is here, and then they've added these other elements to kind of bump it up. Unified color palette, the sky, they've used it just kind of this illustrative texture for their land use. They're really kind of showing it in the building, which is an interesting way. The text is not too heavy, and they've got this is like great little graphic. Again, not super complex, just well thought out. Labels, really clear what's going on. So that same style, but like more zoomed out above and below, they've kind of like added like a bird's eye to their section. So, depending on what you're making and why, like, this, how many bits of this were fudged? I don't know. It depends. Like, they probably have this like all built as a nice little model, and they were able to cut this section and like get that perspective. So kind of setting up your viewports also early on in your 3D modeling software will help you kind of pump this stuff out quick, especially as you are starting to make changes based on your critique feedback. So really, like in Rhino, named viewports, really important. And in SketchUp, what is it, the camera views. So okay, another variation on doing a perspective, illustrative. They've got all their entourage created. Nice fade in this tree, but it's not faded too much. It's like it's 80% opacity. Yeah, 1-point perspective. Just kind of, and how they decide to frame it. They've decided to cut this, the sky outside of the frame that the trees come in. It's interesting, right? It just captures the eye, makes you interested in what's going on, means that you don't need to. Also, like, it's kind of this naive drawing style where you're choosing not to show everything that allows you to take, not have to design everything, right? So what level of detail do you want to show to get the main ideas across? So I really like this one, how they've chosen to take, I think, photos of just people walking in snow, and they've used that as the ground plane, right? So we live in a winter city. When you're designing, you should be thinking about like 4 seasons or the sort of 1.5 seasons that we might have. But it's good to show. So this one's very kind of simple perspective ISO plan that they've drawn, right? With very simple color, sorry about the jumping, color coding that relates to the academic core, the campus core, the dining zone, the recreation zones in green, the housing zones in yellow, and then like this like more intense yellow for the student housing that relates to this lighter yellow for more of the like housing developments built around this campus. And then we can see that like Google Earth photo in the background that's very faint but adds context. So what the hell? Another kind of version, right? So very simple Rhino model here, where they've then chosen to show in white the contours, and then they've just used greens, grays, and then this pathway tone to differentiate in their circulation hierarchies and then their spaces. And then one tree symbol used throughout. Might be nicer to use a couple more tree symbols, but if you don't have time, this is pretty simple, pretty effective, and despite that like higher level of resolution, I think it's like professional level work here. So okay, this is interesting. So they've done like a section cut through their 3D model that they've topoed, and then they've just got this like Google Earth image that doesn't have like 3D buildings or topography turned on behind that helps situate viewer, and you understand that this is a very sloped site that I don't think it's going to be accessible. Maybe oh, there's the accessible paths going down. So, but anyways, and they've got again simplified color palette. They're really highlighting this like vertical circulation for pedestrians here and how they're moving through like a residential and commercial lounge kind of thing. And then we have their like perspective rendering that they've done in, I think this is probably a rendering software or I think that they maybe took this out as just like a rendered version from Rhino, and then they've added all of their textures in Photoshop because like this doesn't seem as realistic. Maybe this was done in Twinmotion or something, but they've definitely added their people, I think, in Photoshop. I think that they could have. There's a bit of a fade here. I think that their people are a little oversaturated, but anyways, we can see some cloud shadows on the grass. It gets lighter as it goes to the background. That's a common convention. We've got the trees drawn in. They've got an opacity, but they're not too opaque or too translucent. So, again, some simple diagrams where they've just done some quick little 3D models, or maybe they've done that technique in Illustrator that I showed you, where you draw that grid and then you draw isometrically. And then this shows how everything relates to spirit, body, and mind, which is their underlying design concept. So I think this is, again, similar, but like very interesting representational technique here for their perspective drawing, where they've got, it's not photorealistic textures, it's just kind of blocks of color, image trace of a tree probably in like either 3 colors or 6 colors, and then they've developed this entourage, made it their own. They've got a title, they've got some hierarchy here, right? So this is the hierarchy of text. Title here, the main headers, and then the captions, right? And it all calls out, super clear to read. Again, then they've got this stylized kind of, we're going to cut off the image here, but have this secondary block of color that gives us room to put our labels. And that's an element of like balancing white space and choosing what not to show for clarity's sake. Okay. Did you get that photo at the back, or did I change it too quick? Okay. Different techniques, right? Really just focusing on line work. Claire, you were asking about gray lines last week. Well, here they've used blue lines for public space and orange lines for buildings, and then done blue shadows. Quite effective, quite simple, quite communicates quite well. And then they flipped it into this section where, you know, they've shown to show some of the subsurface here with like these various densities of granular material and how the trees float in and relate. The sky almost looks like they've used a map for the sky, which is pretty interesting. I think they have. What is this, a map of Norway or some sort of? Anyways, you could do something wacky like that, and then they've just got this like line work, this hatching. I wonder. Cool. Similar, right? They're just really using blue color blocks for the waterways. Everything else is just line work and hatches, and playing with those textures to develop this high quality drawing. Black can be really heavy and difficult to master, but I think these drawings are really effective because of how balanced it is with the white areas, right? Super cool, super effective. This one on the left, just an illustration. The one on the right involves more photo textures, but then they've taken liberties with the moon and stuff like that. So I think here, like just mentioning the restrained color palette, right? So the red accents on the building really kind of or what they're making pop, and then they've repeated that in their rendering to get them to view good side by side, even though this is basically line work and a massing model on the right, and on the left they've used photorealistic Photoshop textures and entourage to help pump up a different view of probably the same massing model. Two variations on simple plan views. This one on the left, I think, really shows like hierarchy of line weights well and textures. Similarly, the one on the right, but I think the one on the right, what's nice is like how well it differentiates between these like different, like the water in the blue, the green areas in the green, and then these kind of two hierarchies of pedestrian pavement in the two gray tones, right? And then the streets are white. So, you know, those simple decisions about how to show what as what really help the drawing communicate it effectively, simply, and quickly. Also, these tree symbols, like the larger trees are more blown out and lighter, the smaller ones are kind of denser and darker, but you can see through them without transparency. Really good decision making. They've got their buildings just in this like darker gray hatch. And then this, I guess, is the most important building or floor plan or public space. Anyways, so really just kind of focusing on the topography here and this like jutty outy bit into the ocean. Buildings shown in gray, but various techniques. Simple 3D model that they've taken some sections and then really amped up in Illustrator to get these going. But they've, you know, traced their little entourage here. They've got people, they've really spent time selecting the entourage so that fits in with like the urban space that they've designed. So, simple collages. So, photographic background, maybe a simple 3D model of these benches, and then just some Photoshop entourage. This you can do in 2 hours. Super quick. Similarly here, you know, they've taken this like either Google Street View or photo of their existing street, and then they've just taken this like photo texture of the paving and this photo texture of a deck, added like a bandwagon. They're like, oh, we can make this like 4-lane city street a lot more pedestrian friendly. And probably, you know, maybe they designed this a little bit in plan, but then they just threw this together in Photoshop using some textures, some layers, some entourage. So, end of slideshow. Any questions? Anything anybody wants to go back to? Okay, amazing. Connor, you're up. Enscape, let's go. Do you guys want like a 5-minute break while get set up, or yeah? Yeah, come back for 10, and then we'll try to switch up, and then we can take a longer break after the Enscape lecture before we get to the